The stallion kicked so hard the barn gate bent backward with a shriek, then buckled to the floor. Dust flew. Men scrambled. One of them hit the ground with a grunt and rolled clear as the horse reared, wild-eyed and foam-laced at the mouth. "He'll kill the next fool who touches him," barked one of the ranch hands, brushing blood off his chin. From the loft above, her voice floated down like a challenge wrapped in laughter. "I'll marry whoever tames that horse," she said. The men laughed, half because they didn't believe her, and half because they knew no man here could do it. Except one. But he hadn't spoken since he rode in 2 days ago with no name and no story, just a dust-covered hat and a scar that ran along his jaw like a slash of moonlight. He stood now just beyond the fence, boots planted firm in the red dirt. Didn't move when the stallion screamed. Didn't blink when the beast charged the corral edge and threw its weight into the rails like it wanted to bring the whole ranch down. The woman in the loft, her name was Eliza Rourke, narrowed her eyes. She leaned her forearms against the railing, the sunlight behind her turning the loose strands of her hair into wildfire. "No rope, no spur," she added, smirking. "And if you whisper to him like he's your long-lost brother, I'll throw in my family's land too." The men chuckled again, one spitting into the dirt. "You hear that, stranger? Looks like the lady's put her whole dowry on a death wish." The cowboy didn't answer, didn't look at them, just kept his gaze locked on the stallion. Then he moved, slow as river stone. One boot forward, then another. He stopped just outside the busted gate, just where the horse could see him clearly. "Hey!" one of the ranch hands barked. "You deaf or just stupid?" Eliza held up a hand. "Let him." A hush fell. Even the horse stilled, barely. The cowboy stepped into the wrecked gate, dust swirling around his boots. The stallion turned toward him with ears back, breath pumping, muscles twitching under its coat like fire under skin. Still, the man said nothing. Not yet. He stepped one more pace in, then dropped slowly to one knee. The ranch hands swore under their breath. Eliza leaned forward, and that's when he whispered. No one heard the words, not clearly, just a shape in the air carried between him and the animal. Something so quiet it didn't even seem like language, more like the memory of sound or the echo of comfort. The stallion's ears flicked forward, his head tilted, breath hitched. The cowboy held out his palm. The stallion pawed once at the dirt, then stepped toward him. The men stood frozen. Eliza pressed a hand to her chest, as if something in her had just shifted without permission. The horse came, 3 steps, 4. Then the stallion lowered its head and pressed its muzzle against the cowboy's open palm. No rope, no fight, no name, just a whisper. When the cowboy finally stood, dust falling from his coat, he glanced toward the loft. Eliza Rourke was still standing there, no smile now, no teasing, just eyes full of something she couldn't put words to. Their eyes met, and that's where everything changed. But let's go back to where it all started. 3 days earlier, the storms had rolled through from the north, breaking fences, flooding roads, and spooking half the livestock in the valley. The Rourke Ranch, one of the last big spreads west of Coldwater Ridge, had taken the worst of it. They lost 2 horses, half a dozen chickens, and their best bull broke its leg on the fence line. But it was the stallion, newly bought, barely broken and half wild from birth, that tore through 3 gates and vanished into the hills. Eliza had put every cent of her father's inheritance into that animal. She called him Canaan, because he was supposed to lead their breeding stock into a promised future. When they found him again, 3 miles from the South Ridge, he was tangled in wire and bleeding, and meaner than he'd ever been. The ranch hands couldn't get near him without risking a boot to the ribs or worse. By the time the stranger showed up, half dead from the sun, dust-coated and silent, the entire ranch was knotted with tension. He never said where he was headed. He never gave a name. He just asked for a place to water his horse and offered to work for a bed. Eliza let him stay because he didn't ask twice. He kept to himself, sleeping in the saddle shed, working without complaint. There was something in the way he moved, like a man made of old grief and quiet storms. It was the second evening when he walked past the paddock, stopped and watched the stallion for a long while. Didn't blink. Didn't flinch when it charged the rails. Just watched. Eliza saw him from the porch and something in her went still. She didn't know why. Maybe she saw it before anyone else. That he wasn't just another man with something to prove. Maybe she recognized something that hadn't been named yet. And now, with the stallion's breath fogging against his hand and the entire ranch holding its breath, her half-joke floated back like prophecy. I'll marry whoever tames that horse. She hadn't meant it. Not then. But now? Now she wasn't so sure. Nobody moved for a long time after that. The ranch hands just stood there, half sure they were dreaming, while the nameless cowboy walked the stallion, Eliza's impossible Canaan, straight back into the main paddock like they'd been riding together for years. No rope, no halter, just a hand resting gently on the animal's neck and that same hush in the air, like something holy had happened right in front of them. Eliza climbed down from the loft, boots hitting the dirt one slow step at a time. Her lips were parted slightly. She wasn't smiling, not exactly. It was more like her face had forgotten how. By the time she reached the paddock, the stranger was already brushing down Canaan with a slow rhythm, murmuring soft again. Words nobody could make out. "You got a name, Cowboy?" she asked. He didn't turn around, just kept brushing. The ranch foreman, Cole, stepped up beside her, still looking pale. "Fella just walked up and silenced the devil with a breath," he muttered. "I don't care what his name is. I say we brand him lucky and get out the good whiskey." Eliza tilted her head, eyes never leaving the cowboy. "I want to know what he whispered." "Probably told the beast we're all idiots," Cole snorted, then nudged her elbow. "You gonna follow through on what you said? About marrying whoever tamed him?" She didn't answer. Didn't need to. Everyone saw the look in her eyes. The next few days passed like a soft fever. The cowboy didn't leave. He didn't ask to stay either. He just kept working. Fixing fences, mending tack, feeding stock, and Canaan followed him like a shadow. The stallion that had once kicked through solid oak now bowed its head when the man entered the paddock. The hands started calling him Whisper, mostly out of awe, part out of fear. Eliza didn't call him anything. She just watched. She noticed how he always rose before the sun, how he never looked anyone in the eye too long, how he flinched slightly at the sound of laughter. Like joy was a language he hadn't heard in a long time. One evening, while the sun sank behind the barn in orange-gold silence, she brought him a cup of coffee and leaned against the fence while he repaired a broken post. "You fight in the war?" she asked. He looked up, just for a second, then nodded once. "Blue or gray?" He didn't answer. That told her enough. "I lost 2 brothers," she said. "Shiloh and Vicksburg." Still no response. "I used to dream about the day they'd come walking up the ridge," she added. "Sun behind them, walking tall, alive. But only thing that ever came back was their boots. Ma kept those under her bed till she died." Whisper set his hammer down and stared at the post, as if something behind his eyes had cracked. Eliza didn't push further. She just sipped her coffee and let the quiet between them stretch out like old cotton. "You're good with pain," she said finally. "That horse, he don't trust easy. But he trusted you." "I know pain," the cowboy said. First words she'd heard him speak in full. It wasn't the voice she'd expected. It wasn't deep and bold like her father's had been, or rough like the drifters who came through needing work. It was low, worn out, like wind through dying grass. She stared at him a long moment. "What did you say to him that day in the pen?" Whisper didn't look at her, just picked up the hammer again. "Same thing I said to myself, back when I didn't want to wake up anymore." Eliza felt her breath catch. She didn't speak after that, just walked back toward the house, coffee cold in her hand, heart a little too loud in her chest. That night, the storm came back. Lightning tore across the sky like veins in a black lung. The wind ripped through the valley with fists full of dust and old memories. The horses screamed, the windows banged, and somewhere deep in the shadows, Canaan bucked and kicked until Whisper ran out into the dark and laid his body against the stallion's side to calm him. Eliza watched from her bedroom window. watched the way the cowboy moved through the chaos without fear, watched the way he whispered into the dark, even as the storm roared around him. She wrapped her shawl tighter and thought of the vow she'd made like a joke. "I'll marry whoever tames that horse," and how it had stopped sounding like a joke. Her daddy used to say, "You can't choose who you love. You can only choose what you do about it." She didn't know if it was love yet, but she knew she didn't want him to leave. The next morning, Cole knocked on her door. "You got trouble," he said, hat in hand. She followed him out to the front gate, where 3 men sat on horseback. They wore trail dust and hard expressions, and one of them had a wanted poster rolled in his fist. Cole handed it to her. Her eyes scanned the page, then scanned again. There was no name, just a drawing, close enough to be him, dead or alive. $500. "What /s this about?" she asked the lead man. "Your boy's been seen in 3 counties under 3 names," the man replied. "Army deserter, killed a man in Wyoming, stole from a union payroll, good with horses, better with knives." Eliza folded the paper slowly. "That's a lot of stories," she said. "You got proof?" The man shrugged. "Enough. We'll take him in now." She stepped forward. "You'll do no such thing without a warrant." The man smiled like a rattlesnake. "That how things work out here?" Eliza squared her shoulders. "It is on my land." Just then, Whisper stepped from the barn. Shirt damp from sweat, hammer still in hand. He looked at the men, then at her. And that's when she knew. By the way he didn't flinch. The way he didn't deny it. The way he just waited for her to decide. She turned back to the riders. "He's under my protection," she said. "If you want to drag him from this ranch, you'll have to go through me." That silenced them. For a moment. Then the snake man smirked. "We'll be back. With papers. And guns." She didn't blink. "Bring more than 3, she said. "And bring a coffin." They rode off, dust rising behind them like a warning. Whisper stood there, silent. "I saw the poster," she said. He nodded. "You kill that man?" He nodded again. "He killed 2 kids and their mother. I found him in a church." "You steal army money?" "I gave it to a freedmen's school in Tennessee. They were gonna burn it down." She stepped closer. "You run from the war?" "Only thing I ran from was who I became during it." Her heart was beating so hard, it felt like it might shatter her ribs. "I don't care," she whispered. He looked at her then, really looked, and something in his eyes finally settled. Maybe it was trust. Maybe it was something deeper. But he reached out his hand, rough and calloused. And she took it, just like Canaan had. She wasn't joking when she said it. Not in her bones. But she wore the words like a dare, and maybe that's what lured the wind in, made the mountains hush. "I'll marry whoever tames this horse," Clara had said. And everyone had laughed. Sure, she was being clever, cocky, maybe even a little cruel. But under that smirk, in the marrow of her heart, she wanted it to be true. For weeks now, the stallion had remained untouchable, white-eyed and thunder-footed, a creature pulled from fire and forged in lightning. Half the valley had tried their hand. She'd watched them all. The boys with names, the men with debts, the gamblers, the sons of ranchers. Some lasted seconds, others didn't even get close. The stallion had drawn blood more than once. Clara stood at the corral every evening, watching the dust settle, her braid tight, her jaw tighter. She never cheered, never mocked. Just stood there, arms crossed, waiting for something she couldn't name. Then came the cowboy with no name. No one saw him arrive. He was already leaning against the fence when dusk fell again over Dustpipe Ridge, hat low, boots scuffed, a single coil of rawhide slung over one shoulder. Folks figured he was just another drifter come to get bucked and humiliated. They didn't know the horse would recognize him first. It happened with no rope, no shouting, just a whisper, and the entire corral seemed to lean in. The nameless man stepped through the gate like he'd been invited to supper. The stallion reared once, high, hooves slicing sky, but the man never flinched. He didn't even raise his hand, just whispered again. The air shivered. The horse landed and walked to him. Clara was standing beside her father, whose face had gone pale with something that wasn't fear, wasn't pride, just awe. Even old Otis, the stable master, crossed himself under his breath. The man reached out, laid a hand against the horse's broad neck. No wildness, no fight, just breathing. "Who is he?" Clara whispered. "No idea," Otis muttered. "But I'd say you're about to find out." The cowboy swung up without saddle or spur. No drama, just gravity obeyed. He rode the stallion in a slow circle once, twice, then guided him to the gate and dismounted like it was nothing. No celebration, no look of conquest, just a quiet pat on the horse's shoulder. And then, without a word, he turned and started walking. "Wait," Clara said. Everyone turned toward her. She rarely raised her voice. She stepped through the corral, dust like it parted for her. Boots crunching, eyes fixed on the back of that man's neck. "Wait," she said again. He turned. Lord help her. He had the kind of face you remember without ever having seen. Not beautiful, just marked, like life had carved itself into his jaw and left dust in his eyes. "I made a promise," she said, standing now just a few feet from him. He said nothing. Clara's heart was trying to claw its way out of her chest. "But I don't know your name," she added. The cowboy studied her a long moment. Then finally, with the softest rasp of voice, "Does a name matter to someone like you?" She blinked. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You see people for what they are, not what they're called." "Maybe," she said. "But if I'm going to keep a promise, I want to know what name to say when I tell my children who their father is." Something flickered across his face. Surprise? Pain? He nodded once, almost imperceptibly. "Call me Eli. Is that your real name?" "It is now," he said. And just like that, Clara turned and walked back toward the house. Eli didn't follow. Not yet. But she left the door open that night, a lamp burning low on the porch. And by morning, his saddlebag was hanging beside hers. No wedding bells, no preacher, just 2 coffee cups and a silence that fit. The stallion, from that day forward, never let another rider touch his back. Only Eli. And once, when Clara was heavy with child, he let her climb up behind Eli, hands around his waist, and they rode through the sagebrush like wind wrapped in skin. People talked. Of course they did. Some said it was magic. Others said the horse had been cursed, and only a man with no name could lift it. But Clara knew better. The wildest things in this world, she reckoned, don't want to be broken. They want to be seen. And Eli, with just one whisper, had done what no lasso could. Eli didn't talk much, not in words at least. But Clara learned early on that the quiet carried its own language, one you had to lean into with patience. The way he touched the horse's flank each morning before brushing it down. The way he looked off toward the hills after supper, like there was a hymn out there only he could hear. And the way he'd sit beside her on the porch without saying a thing, just letting the night wrap around them like an old quilt. They were married in everything but law. No papers, no church, just a rhythm that made sense. She cooked. He worked the fences. When she laughed, he looked up. When he hurt, she knew it before he said a word. It was like they /D agreed long before meeting that they /D carry each other's weight in silence. Because neither had come from a place where love was loud. That winter, the wind never let up. Snow came early and heavy, burying fence lines and carving white ghosts out of the cottonwoods. Clara wrapped wool around her belly and prayed each night that the baby wouldn't come too soon. Not while the roads were still cut off. Not while even the well had frozen at the rim. Eli did what men like him did. He worked without sleep, mended every drafty seam in the cabin, and taught the horse to haul wood down from the ridge, 2 logs at a time, like the beast knew the child's life depended on it. Then one morning, Clara woke to the world swaying. Her breath caught. Pain folded her in half. It was time. No midwife could reach them. No neighbor could hear their call. But Eli didn't blink. He boiled water. He tore linen. And when she screamed, he held her hand so tight she nearly crushed his fingers. He said only 3 words that whole time. "I'm right here." And he was. All through the storm, all through the night. When the cries of the baby split through the wind and brought silence down like grace, he just knelt beside the bed and wept. They named her Unia, a small, fierce thing with dark hair and one hand that always curled tight into a fist like she'd come into the world ready to fight. Eli carved her a cradle from pine and sanded it smooth for days. Clara stitched blankets from old shirts. The stallion, wild thing that he was, stood beneath the window every night, as if standing watch. But peace has a way of making enemies jealous. It started with a rider, then another. By the time spring cracked the ice, they knew the land was being watched. First it was hoof prints outside the barn. Then the chicken coop door left swinging. Eli said nothing, but his rifle came down off the wall and stayed leaning beside the door from then on. One morning, Clara found a note nailed to the corral gate. That stallion belongs to the Holloway boys. They want him back. You've got 3 days. Clara felt the heat drain from her face. The Holloways were known up north, a rough clan of brothers who'd been breeding war horses and trouble for decades. No lawman touched them, and no neighbor stayed after dark. Eli took the note in hand, read it once, then burned it in the stove. No expression. "Should we go?" she asked, heart already heavy with fear. Eli shook his head. "This place is yours now," he said. "I won't run." 2 nights later, the barn was set ablaze. The flames took the sky in both hands and screamed. Eli was out the door before the second crack of timber. Clara grabbed Unia and ducked beneath the porch. The stallion had already broken his rope and crashed through the gate. Clara saw Eli racing to open the back stall just as a beam came down. For a second, the world froze. Then Eli dragged out the last of the hay carts, coughing, clothes blackened, skin raw. But the fire was spreading. The Holloways didn't come themselves, not yet. They sent boys, testers. One rode up in broad daylight, spat near the porch, and said Eli had until sundown tomorrow to hand the horse over. Eli didn't answer, just stared at the man's horse until it spooked under him. Clara looked him in the eye after the rider galloped off. "You're not going to let them take him, are you?" "No," Eli said. "Then what are you going to do?" He looked at her, quietly. "Whisper," he said. She didn't understand then. Not fully. But at sundown, Eli walked the stallion to the hill above the ranch. The same hill they'd ridden after Unia was born. Clara stood at the door, Unia cradled in her shawl, and watched the wind tangle through Eli's shirt as he bent close to the horse backslash's ear. She couldn't hear the words, but the stallion did. It reared once, whinnied, then galloped off into the dusk alone, heading west like it had been released from something heavier than reins. Clara turned back to find Eli behind her, chest rising slow. "They'll come looking," she said. "They won't find him," he replied. "Not in this lifetime. And us?" Eli stepped close. "They'll try." That night, the stars blinked like nervous watchers. And far off, in the darkness beyond the barn ruins, someone screamed. Not in pain, but in frustration. Maybe even fear. Because whatever Eli had whispered into that horse, it had worked. Clara didn't sleep that night, but she never felt safer. The baby was 6 months old when the Holloways came in full. Not riders this time, but a wagon with sides reinforced in iron, pulled by 2 oxen bred thick like war machines. Behind it, 3 mounted brothers rode abreast. Boone, Clyde, and Merritt Holloway, each built like God had intended them for killing and not much else. They wore dust like armor and grins like scars, and they brought with them not a threat, but an offer. Boone stepped down first. He wore a broad black hat with a dent on the crown where he'd once taken a bullet and lived. The legend was he'd smiled when they dug the slug out, said it tickled. He walked slow, deliberate, as if each step had to introduce itself to the dirt. Eli stood waiting outside the cabin with his arms crossed, rifle leaning against the porch post like a sleeping dog that might bite if you touched it wrong. Boone tipped his hat. "Not here to fight," he said. "Not yet. Just come to say we're disappointed." Eli said nothing. Boone continued. "We raised that stallion from a colt, put 4 men in the ground trying to break him. Then he vanished. A month later, we hear some ghostwriter tames him with a whisper. No rope, no saddle. Just a man and a word. And we figured, well, that can't stand. So, where is he? Eli didn't move. Gone. Gone where? Don't matter. You won't catch him. Merritt laughed from his saddle. You talk like you believe that. I do. Boone looked back toward the wagon, then up at the cabin. He noticed Clara at the window holding the baby. His eyes narrowed. See, here's the problem, Boone said, turning back. You took something from us. Now, we're not interested in the horse anymore. No, we're interested in what made him choose you. That whisper. That blood. You changed him. Silence. We want you, Boone said, voice lower now. All three of you, to come with us. Live among us. We'll find out what you are eventually. Eli's jaw tightened. Not happening. Clara opened the door then, just enough to speak. You can't have him. And you sure as hell can't have my daughter. Boone's smile died. I wasn't talking to you, miss. Clyde dismounted and took one slow step forward. Eli's hand found the rifle. The porch creaked like it was warning them all. Boone raised a hand. Enough. He turned on his heel and climbed back into the wagon. Looked back over his shoulder. You've got till first frost, he said. We'll come back. And if you're not ready to leave with us by then, we'll take what we want. The wagon turned. Clara and Eli stood in the silence that followed, as if waiting to hear the echo of what had just been promised. But the land stayed quiet. That night they packed what little they had. But not to run, to prepare. Eli rode out to the mesa before dawn, returned with a bundle wrapped in waxcloth. Inside were old Union maps, trenching tools, and a tiny revolver worn to the bone with age. Clara recognized none of it, but Eli set to work like a man remembering old blueprints buried deep. He dug pits, reinforced the barn rafters, taught Clara how to fire a pistol while balancing a baby on her hip. We won't make it, she whispered one night. He shook his head. We don't have to win. Just hold long enough. For what? He looked toward the west, toward where the stallion had gone. For him. Clara didn't ask how he knew the horse would return. Didn't ask what exactly he'd whispered into its ear that night. She trusted the silence between them more than any vow. The first frost came early that year. The land turned silver and hard, and with it came the sound of hooves. Not just the Holloways, but more. Men who owed them debts. Drifters who liked the taste of someone else's fear. They circled the ranch at dusk, torches in hand, like wolves sniffing a campfire. Boone called out first. Last chance, Eli. Step forward and spare the rest. Eli didn't answer. Instead, he stepped off the porch, rifle in one hand, shovel in the other. He walked past the gate, dug into the frozen dirt, and planted a small wooden stake into the ground. On it was carved one word. No. Boone read it, laughed, then signaled. The men charged, but the land was ready. Pits opened beneath hooves. Ropes snapped taut around necks. Oil-soaked hay lit up beneath boots. The ranch that had been built in quiet love now fought like it had been born of vengeance. Eli fired only once. It hit Merritt in the leg, sent him down hard. Clara fired too from the loft window, missing more than hitting, but forcing the men to scatter wide. But there were too many. Boone made it to the porch, grabbed Eli by the coat. What did you say to that beast? He screamed. Eli didn't reply, so Boone struck him. Clara screamed from the window. The baby cried out. And that's when the wind changed. A thrum came up from the valley. Not hooves, not thunder, but both. The stallion burst from the trees like a storm on legs, flanks foaming, eyes lit with something older than fury. Behind him, more horses, wild ones, all unbroken, all charging. The men scattered. Some fell beneath the herd. Some ran and never stopped. The Holloway wagon overturned and burned. Boone turned too late. The stallion stopped just short of Eli, snorted, then lowered his massive head and pressed it into Eli's chest like a greeting. Eli whispered something none of them heard, and Boone screamed. He raised his pistol, aimed it at the horse's head, but the beast was faster. It struck him once, hard, sent him flying into the snow like a rag doll, never to rise again. The quiet that followed was deep and long. When it ended, Clara was standing beside Eli, Unia cradled against her shoulder. The stallion looked at the baby, and for the first time, Clara swore she saw something like peace in its wild eyes. Eli turned to her, touched the baby's cheek. "She'll never need to tame a thing," he said. "It'll all come to her." Clara leaned into him, tired, worn through, but full. "So," she said with a small, exhausted smile, "what exactly did you whisper to that horse?" Eli looked toward the horizon, where the rest of the herd now disappeared into dusk. "I told him," he said, "you're not a beast. You're just waiting for someone to understand." Clara nodded. "Same thing you told me?" He smiled, and the wind carried the silence between them like a vow older than words.